introduce our next speaker. His name is Aaron Bannon, who is the data guy at GRE?
Data analyst.
Data analyst at GRE. He's been doing analytics on mobile games and stuff for a while now, and he's going to talk a little bit about how data is not equal to revenue, and hopefully give us some insight and ideas and tips on how we can make that not be true and have data help get us to revenue. So without further ado, here's Aaron Bannon.
Good afternoon, morning, afternoon. We're at the precipice. It's hard to tell sometimes, right? So data does not equal revenue. So why are we here, right? Well, data isn't revenue. Data is a tool. And like any tool, we have to use it properly. And if we're not using data properly, we're not going to actually increase revenue. It's not to say that data can't lead to increase in revenue. It's just that we have to use data in the right way in order to do so. So if we look at the game of hockey, and if we wanted to increase revenue in the game of hockey, you know, really it boils down to fan engagement, right? Fans are the ones that come to the stadium, they buy the tickets, they buy the food, they provide the impressions for advertisers. So we want to make sure we understand how fans engage with the game of hockey. So we're going to draw a little chart. Put minutes on the x-axis and some engagement metric on the y-axis. And it's going to look very clear to us, right? It's very obvious. We know exactly how to increase fan engagement into hockey. It's that thing right there in the center. Do more of that. What is that? Fights. Increase fights in hockey. That's going to get people more involved. People like fights. If we look at the game in the sport of NASCAR, you know, what do people like about NASCAR? The wrecks. People like the wrecks. Now, the problem is all the hockey fans and NASCAR fans are out there getting really ticked off at me saying, you're missing the point. There's this activity. There's this engagement. There's a strategy. There's a puck. There's a net. There's goals. You're completely missing the point of the game, right? So does that mean data is bad? If data makes hockey into boxing and NASCAR into pile-ups, what does it do to our video games? Well, data isn't inherently bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, we have to use it properly. Here, a helicopter is saving someone's life. Here, a helicopter is taking someone's life. It's all in how you use the tool. So we're going to quickly go through this because I want to make sure I get to your questions. What we're going to talk about today is data as a tool. Tools must be used properly. And the way we use data properly is we ask the right questions. And central to that is understanding that the why is more important than the what. So who am I? I work for GRE International. My name's Aaron. I'm one on the team of data analysts that is charged with understanding our freemium mobile games. So recently, well, GRE acquired Funzio, and I'm working a lot with those titles. And recently we launched Kingdom Age. We had a pretty good launch week. 1 million players, 15 million battles, hit some top grossing, top overall numbers. So that was exciting. This is one of the products I work on a lot. Before GRE, I was working with a variety of indie developers in the mobile freemium space as well. So I've had a chance to see a lot of different games and how they work and a lot of different management styles or businesses as well. And Brian's smiling because his Riptide smile is up there. So we have to understand the limitations of data. And the first of that is that data cannot design a game. Games are something, you know, there's something unpredictable and human about a game, right? That's what really makes games fun, is that humanity, that sense of humanity, and data can't reproduce that. But data can help us improve the game, right? We can use data to kind of take what is good about that art that exists in the game and make it a little bit better. Kind of using the old principle of you can't A/B test your way into good art. You can take good art and improve it a little bit. You can take great art and maybe improve it a little bit more. But you can't actually create great art out of a game with data. A good example of this is slot machines, the most data-driven of all games. Even slot machines have an element of humanity in the sense that there's art, there's movement, there's something that connects the player to the algorithm that's driving the slot machine. If we just showed the player the algorithm that we were giving them, the players wouldn't care about the slot machine. It's that movement, it's that part of the essence of humanity within the game. Third and most important is that data is an impartial advocate for your players. We don't get a chance to actually talk one-on-one with our players a lot. So actually seeing what they do and don't do within the game clearly communicates what they like and what they don't like about the game. And I'm sure my ex-girlfriend can attest to this, that what I say I like and what I actually do are not always the same thing, right? So simply talking to our players, even within forums about what they like, is completely different than seeing how they behave within the game. So most importantly, we have to ask the right questions. So what are the right questions? So what happened here? Well, somebody drove an Escalade into a tree. That's what happened. But why did it happen? You know, we never really will know why Tiger Woods drove his Escalade into a tree, but that story of why Tiger Woods crashed his car into a tree is so much more interesting than the fact that he actually did crash his car into a tree. And the other part of that is this why thing is elusive, right? We can't actually quantify the why. We can't actually measure the why. We can't really get into the player's head and understand what, why they did something. We can only see what they did. So we have to kind of surround the why with as many ways possible. So games are a series of decisions. It's just a player deciding what to engage and what to not engage in, in a grand series, right? And we can easily measure the what. We can easily know if the player is playing. We can easily know what they're purchasing. We can easily know how they're, what exactly they're doing within the game. Luckily, our actions end up revealing our motivations, right? What we do in the long term can help us understand why we're doing it. So if we can change those why questions, why does a player monetize, into what questions, what are they purchasing, we can understand what it is about what it is that the players do like about the game and improve the game accordingly. So once again with Kingdom Age, we launched, had a cool launch week, but at the end of the day, it didn't meet our expectations. So we were left wondering why. Why didn't it meet our expectations? Quick overview of the game. The game is an RPG-based game, similar to the idea of Mafia Wars, where you have a player, an avatar, and you can engage in PvE jobs, so against the environment, and that's usually core to grinding. You can follow the storyline, get currency, etc. And then there's a player versus player, a social component where you can battle other players, right? So those two key parts. Another thing about Kingdom Age is it is an iteration upon the existing game engine. So we had Crime City and we had Modern War that use the same game engine, similar mechanics, but we changed a couple core mechanics within Kingdom Age. So our hypothesis is that Kingdom Age wasn't performing as well. So the hypothesis, well, I'm sorry, Kingdom Age wasn't performing as well. So the hypothesis is that it was those changes we made to the game that impacted lower performing, but we don't really know exactly what part it was or why it changed the performance. So a couple things that happened were we changed the player versus player battle logic. How do players fight each other? What do they use? What do they bring into the game? Second thing we changed is items and units. We had items in Crime City, we had units in Modern War, and we combined them in the final game in Kingdom Age, and then we also have different consumption rates. So items and units can disappear at different rates depending upon them. Third of all, we introduced animations. So when you're fighting another player in PvP, you can see your avatar fighting the other avatar, which is kind of a cool engagement thing. Fourth of all, we changed the PvE job cost, which any game designer should look at this and say game balancing, like red flag right there. Whenever you start changing how things cost, it can have large impacts on the game. So what ways were we approaching to actually make sense of this game? So here are some of the questions that we were taking, that are very, very measurable within the game to help understand why players weren't engaged as much with Kingdom Age as we expected them to be. So with the PvP battle logic, we more or less complicated things. We wanted to make it more in-depth, more hardcore. We wanted to incorporate more strategy, which raises the question, do players act rationally? Are they actually optimizing for their battle, right? So when we're looking at this change in the game, we can see our players stocking the right thing when they go into battle? Are they engaged? Are they fighting the right people? Are they fighting the right amount? And we can judge that strategy. And if they're not acting rationally, that kind of gives way to two scenarios. First of all, it could be a messaging issue. You're not communicating to the players properly in order for them to play the game, and that's a big issue. So why are they going to actually engage in the game more and pay for the game if they can't understand the game? Second of all, maybe players just favor other parts of the game that's not this part of the strategy. Maybe they favor the aesthetics. Maybe they favor the PvE more than the PvP. With items and units, we can look very clearly and say, what's driving revenue in this game? Is it items or is it units? And each one has different parameters. Are they persistent? Does a player always have items? Do they always have units? Or are they consumable? Those have a big impact on monetization. If an item disappears, the player has to go back and buy it again. Animations is a really interesting one. Did animations increase or decrease engagement? And you can look this on a very high level about like DAUs or how many times a player plays. But a core part of this is understanding what's happening in your game and measuring that, right? So with mobile games, we're typically dealing with very short session lengths. And usually the idea is that a player has X amount of minutes to spend in the game before they leave. They're waiting for the bus. They're waiting out in the mall, any one of these places. And an animation takes time. And that time they're spending in the animation means they're not doing something in the game that's directly tied to monetization behavior. So that animation could actually decrease the gross amount of clicks the player does within the game, thus decreasing monetization in the game. So getting in, understanding what the volume of engagement, where they're playing the game, and the time aspect as well is a critical part to understand the game. Fourth of all, we have player versus environment job costs. And as I mentioned before, we have the issue of balancing. And understanding the core, I passionately believe the core of a game's monetization ability is in its game balance. It's how you balance the game. And if the game is imbalanced, there's no reason to pay. And likewise, if a game is imbalanced, there's no reason to ever come back. On the other end, so getting that balance right, and so we'd have to be able to measure the balance. What impact does the PvE cost have on loot farming is a big issue that we have to face. In the game, a core strategy is to use PvE to gather loot so you can engage in PvP more, right? So we can go back and we can measure, are people looting a lot? What are they getting? Where are they getting it? Are they using that in battle? So all these things kind of approach a vague why. Why aren't players engaging more? And to very concrete what questions. Now, the bad part about this is there's no one question. And I'm not going to tell you the answers to any of these questions because that's not the point. The point is that we get the tool set of asking the questions, right? And it's this barrage of questions, and it's attacking the game from all possible sides and trying to understand how players are engaging with the game and how can we explain that, with the quantified data. So, once again, data is a tool, and we have to use that tool properly. And to use it properly, we have to ask the right questions. And when asking the right questions, we have to understand the why is more important than the what. So, obligation slide, right? So, we're hiring for business intelligence as well. Yay. Yes. Any questions? That was the fastest I've ever given that presentation, too. Sure.
So you just went through all those questions.
Yeah.
It's not fairly clear what your conclusions were.
The point that I'm trying to get across is that the conclusions for KA don't really matter to you, right? It doesn't really matter to anybody but KA. What really helps you out is understanding some of the questions and some of the reasoning behind the questions, right? So the conclusions of the questions are kind of unimportant, right? And honestly, we don't have all the answers to all the questions. I mean, that's why I still have a job. So we're still digging around. Yeah, so my biggest emphasis is I just wanted to kind of share with you how I was approaching those questions. That and there's a confidentiality issue of I was told not to give you specifics on that. So.
All right, if you were to go back and design a game from the beginning,
Sure.
Are there ways for you to design the game to find that information out sooner that you have added?
Sure. I think a key part in the game design process, and I wish every game designer and producer would realize this before they come to me, is make a decision tree. And analytics and knowing what to track is really simple. If you make your game into a decision tree, each one of those nodes on the decision tree is where you need to be tracking. Second of all, that discipline in making that decision tree only makes your game better, because you have to make a conscious decision of how complicated is that decision tree, and that's how much strategy and all these things, and then you have to think about how am I communicating this to the player. So the decision trees to me in the design phase are essential to improving, setting up the architecture for using data properly. Yeah.
So which tools do you use at Gree? Do you have your own internal tools? You use like
Sure. So Gree is obviously of a size. I mean, we have 2 gaming studios now, and we're of a size where it makes sense to have proprietary infrastructure. We do have the issue of there was obviously with the merger. So I was part of Funzio, then we became part of Gree. So there was 2 different analytics infrastructure, and we're in the process of merging those 2 together. What's going to be used in the future is a lot of Vertica, which is a columnar database. So all our analysts are able to use SQL so they can interact directly with Vertica. Tableau is a wonderful visualization program. Also, we'll be using Hadoop for a lot of record keeping and logs. As for what's helpful for independent game developers, I mean, if you don't have the size to leverage that, there's plenty of other great tools, and that comes down to a cost and benefit analysis. One product I'm very impressed with is Swerve, and SWRVE. I would encourage you guys to check them out. They should be around here this weekend. That's a great way. One, they give you a basic server infrastructure for doing A/B testing, which is essential in helping to define the why. And 2, they have really good analytics solutions behind that. And then there's other products like Appsla or Mixpanel and a couple other ones that are a lot cheaper, but not necessarily tailored towards games. Yeah.
Is Swerve for mobile or?
Swerve does.
Do you know a good solution for A/B testing on mobile?
Yeah, Swerve has mobile. So I've been working in mobile. So anything I recommend will be kind of mobile focused. I really don't pay attention to anything that's solely browser, just because it has no use to me, right? So Swerve does have a mobile infrastructure. So another good option is Parse, which kind of does cloud-based server stuff. So if you don't want to go through the effort of setting up and maintaining your own servers, you just want something to be able to ping back and forth, Parse is a great opportunity to do that. You can do things like manage game states, do basic A/B testing, or just server management that you need in order to run a freemium game.
So can you run into a situation where you ask the wrong question? How do you learn how to ask the right question?
So yeah, and that's really the pain, right? Because often, so when I give a presentation, I give a conclusion in a meeting, and like, hey, this is what happens. Is what you don't see is how much has been left on the chopping room floor. You don't see how many different times I've come at this problem, and that's really kind of the pain of data analysis, is that it does take going through it and seeing within the data, maybe the data doesn't tell the story, because what we're really trying to do is have the data tell the story, right? And sometimes it's seeing the data doesn't change within certain perspectives, and sometimes it's seeing another big part is action. Is it actionable? Can you actually change player behavior with that data? So sometimes I'll get into analysis and say, hey, I can see this explanation, but I actually can't change player behavior with it, so it's completely meaningless. And maybe it actually doesn't explain that. Maybe it's just slightly correlated.
You should,
Sure.
When you're in a situation where you have something that it's not actionable,
Sure.
do you still have? Is it still useful to know? Or you should focus only on on data you know you can move the needle?
I think that the only data worth knowing is data that can change your behavior. That's not to say that it's completely useless to run across some unactionable data, because it might help you get to the actionable stuff eventually. But especially with KPIs or measuring games, if it doesn't change your behavior, and most importantly, if it doesn't change your players' behavior, then it's completely meaningless data. Because the point is for us to look at things and be able to tune the game, and to be able to tune the game, we have to see a change in behavior. So with every point of data, I always ask, how am I going to use this? What is this going to change about my behavior? Sure.
You sort of answered the question just now a little bit kind of generic.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that all data can be boiled down to saying, okay, we want to change behavior.
Sure.
Change how much time they're spending. We want
Sure.
to change the frequency of visit. We want
Yeah.
to change how much stuff they're purchasing. But what are the KPIs that you're looking at? Like, what are the big sort of areas that define a successful game versus one that's struggling?
So, speaking from a large multi-billion-dollar company with a lot of different titles, with a lot of different types of titles, everything can be boiled down to how many players and how much money, right? So, looking at the core stuff there, saying, obviously, DAUs are interesting in the sense of how many players are you seeing within a day. MAUs, how long are those players sticking around a little bit. Retention rates are critical in terms of like 1, 3, 7 day retention rates. I find are very, very helpful. But also not just retention within a day, but how many players come back after the first session. In mobile, there's a lot of people that leave after the first session. Other KPIs, ARPDAU is critical. ARPDAU tells you of the players you have, how much are they spending? So average revenue per daily active user, and that's a really critical metric that you'll hear a lot around the GUI office, because it kind of tells the health. It doesn't give you a sense of the volume of the business, but it tells you the vitality of the business. So you have those heartbeat metrics that are really high level and kind of agnostic to games. Getting into specific games, one thing we'll look at we'll find the areas of a game that kind of drive monetization. So in Kingdom Age, fights drive monetization. Our heaviest monetizers are fighting a lot. So we're looking at fight rate. We're looking at win rates. When people are fighting, how often are they winning? And so these are more game specific, but just those areas that are tied to monetization. And that's something that you're going to have to kind of dig into your game and understand a little bit about your players to get those KPIs. Does that help?
It does. And then one last question is, so in some of the free-to-play models,
Sure.
Are you happy with players that just grind? Is that okay? Do they
Yeah, I mean, the goal of our games is to create a game that people love to play, right? And in fact, the goal is to create a game that people love to play so much that they choose to pay, right? So, yeah, we know when we make a game that, over 90% of players, depending upon the game and the conversion of the game, over 95% of the players are never going to give us money. And we're okay with that because we make the game for them to enjoy playing. We also make the game so those people that do choose to play love the game enough that they pay us in a recurring fashion and a lot of money. So, yeah.
Hey, hi. My name is John Karaika. I've got a free-play game as well.
Sure.
I want to answer the question this gentleman had about people who grind. Our experience is that people who grind well, put it this way, players are content. And if they grind and they do earn a certain amount of stuff in the game, but they wind up being content for the whales and the other
Yeah.
the dolphins. And so we want to have a lot of players, regardless if they pay or don't, because it makes a lively community. If you go to a party, you want to go to a party that's loud and fun.
Yeah.
You don't want to go somewhere where there's like two people just kind of swooshing in the corners. So the point is, you definitely want to have all of those. And the more you have, I think the whales and high spenders want to have targets because we have a military game, and
Yeah.
stoppers, and goal catchers, and it's all good. It all works out the end.
A key thing to think about that is you don't want to make it free to play but pay to win, because that's going to kill that kind of community aspect. But those dynamics can change throughout the life of the game. Like the impact of monetization early on in Kingdom Age and Modern War is very, very different than the impact of monetization and the percent spenders you see much later on in the game. And thinking about, when you're having a PvP mechanic where people are fighting, you have to think about how does monetization work in the early stage, and especially also in the later stage when you have maybe like over 50-70% of the people that are playing late on, much later in the game, they've all paid just at various different points. So then it kind of become like, does it become a pay to compete or a pay to play? I mean, you have all these different balancing questions, but understanding how your users are engaging with it, once again. So, all right. So I think we're wrapping up. I don't want to stop you guys from lunch. If you have any other questions, I would love to. I very enjoy this. I very much enjoy data and games, so would love to talk about it with you guys. So thanks a lot.